Actually think I found it.
Yeah, let me just make it. I was going to do learning catalytics today, but several students, for one reason or another, quite a few weren't able to come today. And
Ah,
so I've switched it to tomorrow, 3 o'clock. So learning catalytics,
ah,
we'll do at the 3 p.m. lecture tomorrow. So if we overrun, we'll carry on. We're going to just flip them around because I can record this lecture. So those who couldn't make it because they had other stuff that they contacted me about, I didn't really want them to miss out on the opportunity of being graded. Okay, so I think other than Inception playing really loudly in the background here, okay, Moodle's not working for some of you. Okay, folks, I'm going to hit the record button. I think I've hit the record button. Right. Okay, well, welcome all, and those who've managed to make it this evening, afternoon. Okay, so the plan for this particular lecture is going to be a couple of different things. Let's do some basic housekeeping, first of all. And I'll do this quickly at the beginning, just so those who aren't here want to know. Next week, we are grading your worksheet 1. And I think the number of the worksheet is 1E or something quite obscure. Hang on, it's just here on the screen behind us. Yeah, 1E. So what you want to do, if you haven't completed it for your practicals, is just as we did with Python, we're going to give you one-to-ones and we're going to give you a grade from 0 to 3. And just to remind you, 3 means everything is complete and almost perfect. 2 means that there are a couple of gaps. 1 is only started, and 0, you haven't done anything. And just as we did last year, this will contribute, bear with me a second, I'll turn the music down a bit. This will contribute towards your grade. Matthew has it somewhere in one of his lectures, what the percentage is. Please don't ask me because I've forgotten. Okay, so I'll keep an eye on the chat. If there are any sensible questions, I will. Yeah, so Christian, are you a fan of the soundtrack of Inception? Yeah, it's very, very good. It is one of the 10%. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, it's about 10%. And it will be not every single worksheet. Matthew's going to take a percentage, a subset of your best grades to allow you to have a little bit of variation, and some won't be as successful. This first worksheet, you should try to just get everything as high as possible on it because it's probably the easiest one you'll get. Then I think I have about 8 or 9. I'll have to check my numbers. Okay, you like Interstellar. Yeah, Interstellar is, I'm sorry, I'm being distracted. Interstellar is a good soundtrack. I think Inception is better. But anyway, we will have our biases. I would recommend you try to get the full grade for this one because it's the easiest one. So that's what we're doing in terms of marking. In terms of your work, you are entering week 2. So your aim by the end of next week is to complete worksheet for that week, which is a funny number because it's all broken down, worksheet 2G. So that's what you're working on in your practicals. If you look at the schedule, and it's always just worth reminding students of the schedule. Give me a second, I'll pop it back up onto the screen for you. So if you can see that clearly, yeah, so we have just completed that week where you had to work on worksheet 1E. We're marking, if you look at this column here, we are marking 1E next week, and you are doing 2G next week. Now, this week and next week are relatively light. Arrays do start stepping up. So if you're finding these weeks nice and light, piece of advice, push forward to that week. Don't wait for it. I've commented out the other stuff to do with objects and stuff. We'll come back to all of that in a minute. I was going to make a comment here about the week 3. Week 3, you might notice if you do go ahead, that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 separate worksheets. Each of them was actually a test we did in the previous year. You will only be marked on one of them for the kind of sign off, but I would recommend you do as many as you can because it's very, very good practice. So that's where we are in terms of worksheets. Yeah, and so Tom, let me just explain for learning catalytics. Let me just put my learning catalytics. We have a handful of absences from students who contacted me, and I was hesitating which way to do it, whether to do this on the 3 p.m. lecture or today. So I've decided based on those people who've contacted me, so they don't miss out on getting their start, having a go at it, that we'll do it at the 3 p.m. lecture tomorrow. The advantage is if it spills over, there's an optional session immediately after, so it can spill over for a few minutes without clashing or creating any issue for your timetables. So that's happening tomorrow. So that's the housekeeping stuff done. Let me just pause. Here's some other questions. What about people who plan for the Learning Caddy and won't be able to attend tomorrow? Christian, that's a very, very good question. Won't be able to, when you say won't be able to attend tomorrow, no one's contacted me and said they couldn't go to the 3 p.m. This judgment was made on the number of people who said today they had various different issues they couldn't do. So I think that's a fair point, but no one has contacted me about the Friday. If people decide not to do it, that's something I can't really control, unfortunately. Christian, is a fair point though, but we have to be, I want to be just a little bit flexible about it. There surely will be plenty of opportunity for people to compensate the odd gap that they have, but it's me trying to be flexible for you lot. So with that said, okay. Does anyone else have a problem with Moodle Pro and does not load for me most of the time? Okay, that's worth flagging up with IT at some point, Brian. Okay, so what are we going to do in this session? What I'd like to do in the remainder of this session is pick up a couple of things and threads that came up during the week of practicals for the people who came, and some of the questions that appeared, and some of the techniques and concepts and approaches to programming. So this bit will be recorded, and my recommendation is either chat through the chat window and ask me questions as we do this, because this is a response and also a way of gathering together some of the issues and questions that have arisen, but also to give you what's really, really important with programming is not just being able to write a line of code, but it's to have what we call strategies, approaches to the whole process of writing code. And the more you start thinking of writing code as something which has strategies, you have methods, you have kind of frameworks of how you actually go about writing the code, how you go about pulling the code together, how you go about solving problems. The more you do of that, the better you will become programmers. The best programmers aren't the ones who can write the most lines of code. And I don't know if anyone has seen that website, Will Robots Replace Me or something. I think it's called something like that. Will Robots Replace My Job? Maybe someone wants to Google it, replace my job. I did it a few years ago at an induction, and I got the students to shout out jobs that they thought would be potentially replaced. And someone typed in software engineering. There we go, someone got it. That's it. Joseph, you've got it. Right, hang on, let me just pop that up on screen. So I can make the point, I hope. Let's drag it onto this screen, give me a sec, there we go. It's actually a very interesting site. I don't know if it's been updated, but we had a very interesting discussion because someone typed in software developer. Now, I'm not sure if this is still going to be true, but let's have a look. Let's say application developer. Okay, application developer has a low chance of being replaced. Does anyone know why? But there are other, I'll leave that question open. You can type in some answers if you want to just, yeah, that's a really good answer. Creativity, the most efficient code, Hector, you can actually get an algorithm to do. Creativity is an absolute key here, element. having user input won't make any difference. There is a, let me find another job which is very, very similar. I think it was software engineering. Let's have a look if they can have it. There are some software, let's have a look at computer programmers. That's a good one. Now that's much higher, that's 48%. So will artificial intelligence replace computer programmers? Why is that higher than, say, software developers? It's for the reasons that you've picked up. Yeah, understanding human interfaces, that's a good point. Let me just drag the chat window into your visibility so we can all see, so you can understand my point here. Yeah, they're all very interesting. Tab 9. Tab 9 is a kind of typical innovation of what the future holds for you. Basically, just learning to write lines of code is almost easy today because you can Google it, you can go to Stack Overflow. If you've got a lecturer like me, they supply you with tons of code, etc., etc. Yeah, anywhere where human beings have to use initiative, creativity, right? Again, these are things that are almost irreplaceable at the moment. Initiative, creativity, and actually the ability to think and problem solve. What you will discover, if any of you do go and get involved in artificial intelligence, is that the ability to think, robots can, machines can have a form of thinking we call computational processing, okay? Artificial intelligence, machine learning can have versions of what, a subset of what we call thinking. But what differentiates humans at the moment from machines is our ability to deal with unfamiliar, with situations where the variables are unknown, right? Before I go off on too heavy a tangent, the critical element I'm trying to get at here is that you go and do a degree, not just to write lines of code. You go to a degree so you can deal with complex situations where you have unknowns in problems, technical problems. And someone who comes out of a degree who can deal with unknowns and knows how to think around and work out how to solve problems where you don't have all the answers and you can't just look up the answers, that's what you're really going to be employed for. That's a much more critical faculty. So I don't go off. No, we're not, Thomas. No, tomorrow, 3 o'clock. So the purpose of my sessions, these live lecture sessions is to engage you with not just writing tons of lines of code or give you theory, but it's to give you strategies and approaches to how you code and how you solve these problems, how you can think when you tackle any of the exercises you're given, so it develops your thinking skill properly. So that's my aim. Okay, with that in mind, let's have a look at a piece of code that popped up a lot this week. If you want to interrupt, please just unmute yourself and just ask the question. I hope everyone can see this. Someone was doing exercise 1, and I think it was a group today, and we were looking at this helper function. Now, let's try a little poll. There is a little poll facility directly what differentiates random output noise from creativity? That's a very, very interesting question. Hang on a sec. I have a question regarding the layout of our Java projects. I've got each of the questions on a worksheet in a different package with the class per question and a project. Here's a screenshot. Okay, right. So let's actually tackle this question. Let me pop that onto your screen so you can all see. So this was the second issue I was going to discuss with you. It's a really crucial strategy. How best to organize your files and questions. Unfortunately, we can't tag code at this stage, because if you could, it would be really easy to make it a searchable database or a searchable index. Now the way that you've done it is a typical way that lots and lots of students have also tried. I would say, okay, there's a question here that's just popped up, and I'm just going to broadcast the question. If you are not experienced as a programmer, do not use anything other than IntelliJ. If you've already got prior experience, then you're welcome to try to carry on using VS Code, for example. VS Code is not as useful as IntelliJ for Java. It is an excellent a light platform, but it's not specifically geared towards, doesn't give you all the bells and whistles that will help you, just for those who might be asking. So let me take up Charlotte's question first of all. You see that file structure? What I would recommend is to do it like this. Rather than make each, see, I've got a worksheet folder here, I've got in there 2 exercises. You end up multiplying the number of files that you have. A better way to do it would perhaps be this. And this would be my recommendation. Not even have a worksheet folder. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. And I'll just give you a suggestion for it. I'm going to get rid of all of that, right? Delete that worksheet folder. The simpler structure that you can use, this is going to just be right. There's my default package called My Files, okay, for this project. In there, there's a file called exercise 1. If I right click that and rename that, and I call it a worksheet 1, okay, because this is probably where some of you are thinking about it. And in each worksheet, you have a number of different questions. So how would you organize it? Well, there are 2 elements here. First of all, I want to talk to you also about helper functions, but this is how I would do it. And I think I've popped, thank you very much. I'm very lucky I get a cup of tea brought to me. I would do it like this. Public static void question. No, remember, we're trying to use camel case, so lowercase for your, so question 1. And then what I would do is, let's just comment that, get that out of the way for the time being. When I want to execute that code, I just do that. Okay, so in here, in question 1, whatever I need to run it, I would create my scanner object. I would do all my input procedures, my input. I would create a small subset inside here. Then when I need to use it, I place it, the name of it, inside main. So that will execute it. So that's question 1. You can test question 1, see if it works, if it's fine. Then you can go on and do question 2. And so you can create more of these public static voids. Now, what's the advantage? The simple advantage is that you're only using 1 file, and you have tidily organized all of your questions into that same file. So I've got 1 file here called worksheet 1. I know that all my responses and all my answers are basically inside there. Whichever one I want to test, I switch off the other one. No, it doesn't at all. The way that it works here is it doesn't affect runtime. When this class is not built into an object, okay? Yeah, and Christian, I'll come back to the question of helper function because that's the second related question, okay? So let me go slowly and just try to pick. You can use a switch statement, Ethan, that's fine, but just commenting out like that's nice and simple as well. But let me just answer Charlotte's question about runtime and overheads. The confusing, potentially the confusing element of main is that main is always your entry point. If you don't have it here, it will never touch your code. Okay, you could do that. We'll come back to the scanner and how we manage that in a second, okay? Because we need to talk, there's a couple of related questions. I'm going to give you the options. Look, I'll tell you how I'll place it. I'll say it to you. You should use your judgment based on your past experience plus the kind of suggestions I'm giving, but I'm not forcing you to do it this way. I'm just giving you a strategy, especially for those who have none. It might help them. And Hector, you keep your question because I want to come back to that as well and some of the others. When you run this program, it doesn't touch question 1. This code down here doesn't appear. It doesn't enter the process of building and running because it's not being executed. Only question 2 will run. So it's actually really straightforward. It isn't complex. It isn't, you know, if you create 500 files in your project of different classes, but you never use them inside here, it's not going to make any difference to the runtime of your application. It's only when they appear here and you create, later on you'll understand when we create something called an object out of it or you use it, that you start having an overhead for doing it. This has actually no really practical significant overhead, but it's a simple mechanism. Right, so that's my response to you, and I'm not forcing you to do it. And Charlotte, stick to the method you feel most comfortable with. This is just a kind of a simple, uncomplicated way. Okay, so I want to pick up the second range of questions about strategies. So that's a simple strategy that will help me organize my code. So as I work through and I get stuck with, say, worksheet 3, the advantage is I can just create a new file for my next week class, call it worksheet 2G or whatever it is, and then I can keep all. And in order for that code to work, and rather than not refer back to that, I just grab that main. So it becomes a separate entry point. There we go, separate entry point. And then I can run that worksheet 2G independently. Worksheet 1 won't be noticed and all the rest of it. So on this file, I can have all my answers, all my questions in a parallel way to that. Okay, so then you start building up a pattern of code. The idea here is that you're trying to write code that you can also go back to. It's also easier when they mark it because they can just scroll through it. Or yeah, I think, Ali, that's a really, really good point. I wasn't actually thinking about that. Yeah, what I would try to avoid, okay, there is a little bit of a tendency to get a little bit excited by how many files you can create. I would try, that's okay, Tom. I would try to keep it as simple as possible. You don't use object-oriented programming in Java to arbitrarily complicate your code. You don't create files and classes because you can. You do it out of necessity. And if there's no necessity for it, keep it as simple as possible. When you hit later on in weeks 4, 5, and 6, and we start coming to the coursework, you will be creating classes and objects and doing all that kind of stuff. For those who don't know what that means, you'll be forced to create more files. My recommendation at this early stage for a discipline, from a point of view of personal discipline, is don't multiply the number of files you need. Okay. Yes, as Ali has said, yeah, Ethan, that's fine. They're fun. Okay, I won't comment on that. But as Ali just said, when we're trying to mark it and it's all in a single sheet, it's actually really easy for us to look at your code. And that's the way that perhaps a useful way for you to think, if I'm trying to get this assessed, if I have it in 6 different files, do I need to have it in 6 different files? Okay, so that's just a question and a thing for you to think about. So this is a simple strategy. And now we come to a really interesting question, which came up this morning and on Wednesday and on Tuesday about helper functions. Some people have noticed that I've been creating helper functions in some of the videos, and there's a week called 1x helper functions. And what I did is I just dropped them into, so if this is worksheet 1 and I create a useful, let's do the basic one, right? That I did right at the beginning. Let's create a print and simply make it do that, right? That's a really simple helper function, and we'll use it as a stand-in for more complex. Now, it doesn't need to return anything, so it doesn't need the word double there. It's just void. Public, because it's visible. Static, please don't ask me. That might just spend us 4 hours trying to explain what that means, but I'll try in a minute. Void is what it's giving back, its return type, okay? If it's not returning anything and it's just displaying a line of code, clearly you don't need to have any type of data, so you put void there. That's a very simple one that I can use instead of all my system out print lines in worksheet 1. But then the question comes, hang on, worksheet 2, I want to do the same thing. I want to use that same helper function. And I don't want to cut it from there. What am I going to do? Oops, I'm messing up my code. Hang on a sec. Okay, so what do? You could do this. You could go to it into your other worksheet and copy and paste it in. But one of the students, I've already forgotten your name, but you know who you are because I said it to you in the session. Yes, Adriano, there you are. Good. Adriano, who has some programming experience, showed his group a really nice strategy, and I'd like to share that strategy with you. I was trying to avoid doing this because I didn't want to overcomplicate it, but actually in the long term, this might benefit us, but we've got to go really cautiously, right? And I will try to make clear why. First of all, just add a new Java class and call it, I mean, I always call mine util or utils, right? But you can call it helper functions, give it a name that makes sense to you. I'm going to call this helper functions because you all know what it is. It doesn't have a main, right? All this is going to have in it are a bunch of functions that I can reuse anywhere in any of the worksheets, right? It's not going to store data. It's not going to manage data. It's just going to hide simple things like print statements, getting input from a user, etc. Okay, so let's go to worksheet 1. Let's kind of clear up this mess here a bit and give you a very, very simple working example, right? There's the print statement. So if I come to the main and I want to demonstrate this to you, okay, so this is inside the same class, right? So if I run that from worksheet 1, give it a second. Nice and simple. It's inside the same class, right? Because that's the one that it's running here. Actually, I should have that prompt inside there. It doesn't matter. Now, what I want to try to do is actually take that away from there, drop it into my helper functions, and into my helper functions, I can add as many as I like, right? Think of it like some of you I discussed having like your library of useful functions that you repeatedly do stuff, right? Then I come to worksheet 1. Let's run it again and hear it complain, because it's now should now say to us, here we go. That's the error you want to see. Method, I can't find it. What is this print, right? Okay. Bear with me a second, Sophie. We'll come back to those more specific. It's not automatically linked, right? That's my first point. You notice I've taken it out of that file, that particular worksheet class, and it can't see it. It's complaining. Where is it? So I have to link it. Now it's sitting in its own over here in something called helper functions. So what I can do is next to my import statement, I can just say helper functions, and I can do this. And it says, it's interesting, it says helper functions does not exist. Hang on a second, it's a syntactical thing here. Bear with me a second, let me do that. That's interesting. That's kind of fairly useless, isn't it? Right, who can spot what I've done wrong here? You can overload it. Absolutely, thank you very, very much. Right, so Christian has spotted what's wrong. And that's actually a worthwhile problem for you to witness. I'm trying to import it, but the question it's saying to me, that the issue it has is, hang on, where is this helper functions? That's the kind of main package. So we have to reference it in relationship to the package it's in. Now, when I hit my files and I press dot, suddenly you can see everything that's inside that package, and I can now directly reference it. So there you see helper functions is there. So I can just click that. Let's get rid of that one. On its own, you can't simply drag it in. So notice I use the folder, the package folder, and then I specify helper functions. Let's run it. Let's see if we can find the print function. Oh, it didn't like that. Print. Why not? Cannot find it. Cannot find it. It's always funny how this happens inside, but it's actually a really good problem. So before we continue, yeah, I don't know. I don't remember having to put a static in front of the helper functions. Just bear with me a second. I'm deliberately lingering on this, okay? Because, thank you, Adriano. I'm deliberately lingering on this just to help you remember it, that it's not just a question of putting it in another file and then it automatically links, right? It's a little bit trickier. So I'm going to stick, this is why I don't particularly like this, and I'll tell you why in a second. Let's run it now. And it can't find this. Right, hang on. I'm going to drop it from there. There are a couple of issues here, okay? No, Jared extends is to do with inheritance. So do you see that it isn't actually that straightforward to go ahead and get it accessed? There is a very, very simple solution of doing this. That resolves it. Using static in your import statement is not actually the ideal way of doing it. There we go. Actually not printing anything, so that didn't prove anything. So let's say blah, blah. Okay, look how I solved this problem. It's really critical. Oh yeah, Adam, you just got there. Yeah, absolutely, you're spot on. Yeah. And you could, Robert, write my files dot helper functions dot. Now, here's an interesting thing here, okay? I'm importing this in and making that file and everything inside it visible inside anywhere I want to use it. But this is a little bit of a nuisance. Helper functions is a long word, right? Helper functions dot print. How does that make my code any neater and tidier? Well, one thing you could do is you could just rename this, refactor this, and just call it HF, short for helper functions, right? Go back to here. And then you notice it says HF print blah, blah. Let's have a look. Let's run it. Let's see if that works. Now, why did that work? I'm trying to give you not the complicated, because we are trying to avoid the really complicated concept here, okay? That's coming in week 4, not in week 1. We're actually still at the tail end of week 1, right? So we don't want to overcomplicate it. So look at what's happened and look at how it worked. I created a file elsewhere. I called it HF. Sometimes you can even call it, this is why I like utils, okay? But I called it HF, short for helper files, right? Yeah, and refactored it, okay? I can in here now add in anything I like, as long as I use the signature public static void, and I need to explain why. There is a colleague of mine, who was discussing a problem with static. And so I went through a session with him this morning to try to explain a concept. A print line has a carriage return Catalin, and print, I think it's just print you've got there. I think just doesn't. Okay, so yeah, print format. Sorry, I didn't see the F there. Okay, you can see that works. That's actually quite useful, because that means in worksheet 2, let's go to worksheet 2. Let's drop it into worksheet 2, and let's say this is WS2, right? Right click in there and run worksheet 2 main. Let's see what happens. Will it crash? Will it complain? No, it's used it. This is worksheet 2. But notice the import statement has disappeared. Why is the import statement disappeared here? It's because what IntelliJ has calculated and worked out, hang on, let me answer your question in a second, Nikhil. What IntelliJ has worked out is that they're actually in the same package. So don't worry about importing it. Your complication, all that messy stuff I was showing you, is where it does get messy. Right, let me just answer. Would it be better to use system out print line by typing S out, then enter, so you don't have to convert a number into string, then printing a number? No, I would say that's a nice little trick, but actually it's better for you to get used to this type of thing. Let me just show you what what Nicholas just said, right? Let's just take a variable integer and I set it to 0 and I want to print it, right? Like that. Now, the print statement, the print method function expects a string, okay? It doesn't expect, where are we? It doesn't expect, where am I, worksheet 1? A number. So let's see what happens when you run it. First of all, let's start spotting the errors, and then also look at that. It says incompatible types. Integer cannot be converted to string. So Nicole's question is that, that's a pain. There's another way. If you type in S out, it will help do all the conversion for you. Try to avoid that. I tell you why, because it's a good, really good practice. Second-year students are stumbling into this while I speak. This is essentially what you need to learn to do. If you type in string value of, oops, let me just do that again, string dot value of, then place the I inside there, that is a really useful thing for you to learn about. It converts explicitly different types of data types for printing statements. Let's run it. Let's see if it's worked. And there we go, 0. That's a really useless example. Let's put a different number in there so you can see, just so the concept is clear. Why would I want you to do that? I would want you to do that and encourage you to do that because I'm trying to teach you Java. And this is really, really quite crucial. And for some of you might really appreciate it. Certainly those computer scientists and software engineers who go off into software engineer, we're teaching you explicitly Java. But the problem is, if we stick to all the clever little tricks that Java give us, we lose sight of the fact that C#, C++, C++, and in the distance path, C, and then also sideways, JavaScript. All of these languages form a family and they all have very similar syntax. They all have semicolons to indicate the end of a line. They all have curly brackets. So my purpose in trying to stay away from things that are unique to Java would mean that you can take a block of your Java code, you could pump it through. Has anyone heard of this platform? Anyone heard of that? Xamarin, as it's called, is a cross-platform mobile development environment. And what it lets you do is you can build Android apps and Apple iOS apps all on the same environment. And it uses C#. Yeah, it's not a health condition, but that's quite funny. Basically, it writes it in C#. So it lets you write in C# and develop mobile apps at the same time as iOS. It does indeed. But the power of this type of thing, if you're looking to the future and you're looking to learn skills in even an introductory Java course, it's a huge advantage of what I'm trying to do with you. If I'm teaching you Java in a way that shows its similarity and emphasizes its similarity to other languages, if you want to develop, you go and join a company, or you in your summer think, I want to develop a mobile app, but I want to do it and there's another language for Apple, it's called Objective-C. Again, it shares the same syntax. My point is really simple. By teaching you this in a way that's almost neutral to all the special features of Java, it's basically teaching you as if we could almost be teaching you C#. Those who've got C# background who've come into this course will find it really easy to code because I'm forcing everything to be explicit. You've developed an addiction to XAMPP, have you? Yeah, some people do apparently. C++ is still very popular if you want to go into engineering, if you want to go into, well, if you want to go into cybersecurity, you need to do this. You need to be confident with this. C++ is still out there. Other languages of the same family will carry on. So yeah, there are tons and tons and tons of alternatives, but this is a question of syntax, the look and feel of the language, and the fact that these three, partially JavaScript is as well, as is Objective-C, but these aren't object-oriented so much, but JavaScript actually in fairness is now. It means that you're learning a bunch of concepts through Java that are transferable across different environments. Okay, so that's that kind of waffly explanation. So you notice this, right? I created a helper file over here. That's one way of doing it, but the better way of doing it is doing it as an object, okay? Not to do this. This is relying on something called static. Who knows what the word static means here? Let's just see if we can peel that word back. Anyone want to attempt? Fixed, yeah, generally that's pretty good. Brian, ironically, that's a good word to stay still. Private, not private, no, not private. My brain is static. Okay. It's like constants, yeah, constant, fixed, that you're on the right kind of track. It's actually quite an abstract idea. Stable, not stable, no, not stable, but that's interesting. Cracking and hissing noises. I'm not quite sure what that means. Oh, static. Yeah, absolutely. I've got you now. allows you to use the method without having to make an instance of the class it belongs to. Tom, you're showing off. You know your object-oriented stuff, so just keep your showing off to yourself. Yeah. Adriano also knows his stuff as well. You don't need to create an instance of it, right? For those who are completely unfamiliar with objects and how this works, the crucial element is that with a static, you don't, as Tom and Adriano have correctly both said, you can use as is, right? You can't store data in this. Yeah, you tell them, Stefan, they're just being outrageously show-offy, and cheeky that they are, but that's fair enough. The feeling that in your arm when you wake up after spending yeah. Okay, so what you're going to find in week 4, 5, and 6 is that we end up actually dealing with something called objects. At the moment, we're not creating objects. If you use the static word in here, in this kind of class, I've often experimented. Let me just do something quite, let me change the name. I don't like HF. That's even more useless. I would call it utils. And what's nice about it is the refactor changes your name. Utils might be more useful word for you. I use it all over the place. Anyway, utils is a very common concept to create utility functions or helper functions in your code. Because what does a helper function do? Think about what it can do. It can do. Then perhaps that's a good point. So maybe I want to call mine util. There we go. Now I won't clash with Java, but Java will be fine because it will spot that it's not imported. And when it's imported, it might struggle. Okay, so the point here is that when I create these utility functions and these utility stuff, and I know I'm going on about it a bit, but I want to encourage you to try it and work it out, right? Node modules. I'm not quite sure what you mean by node. Utils. I like that, Kobe. It's even funnier. What's the advantage of this? What's the advantage of this kind of util or utility functions? It means, as Adriano actually expressed it probably the most precisely, sorry, Tom, you're good, but Adriano, I think beat you there. I'm joking. You both were very, very good. Don't worry, I'm just being cheeky. But Adriano's point is probably spot on. You don't have to create an object and an instance from it. I can't remember if he said it or you said it. The point is here, you can use it as is. If it's in the same folder, the same package, like it is here, the trick to do it is you create it in the same folder, then do this. Create a new package, and you could create this my files helper, right? If I created that, then I grabbed my utils and I dragged it into that helper and then said refactor it. What you should notice is that it creates an import statement for it. So it actually helps you if you move files around, but don't create them in separate folders. Create them in the same folder and drag them, refactor it, and you can still use it. That's the import statement because it's saying it's actually a subfolder and there is your utils. So you can use it as is, but the crucial element of static, the technical meaning of static is, as people said, you don't have to create an instance, but there is another word very close to this. Static has no state. That means that you are not, a state is to do with something called data. If you store data in an object, think of it like this. If you've got a bot in a game and you shoot that bot and that bot's got 3 lives left, the state of that bot is that it's got 3 lives left. If you shoot it again, it's got 2 and it's on its way out, right? So it's got a state because the data, that bot, that object, which is building your bot in your game has data which manages its current state. Now, that concept is critical here. When you use static, you don't have states. You're not dealing with storing data. You are literally giving something for a piece of your code to do. It does it and gives you back the result, doesn't do anything else with it. That's closer to the concept of static in the proper abstract sense. So bear that in mind. Sounds like an anarchist. Exactly, an anarchist's dream. Yes, I like that, Sophie. That's very, very funny. Yes, so static. Well, you say static, not dynamic. This is what's interesting about these static these static functions or methods, you can create an add function here. Look at this one here. Let me give you a very simple example. If I am not storing data and I'm going to just return, say, a double, and I create an int and I pass it two numbers, and I'm deliberately using this example because you'll recognize this from worksheet 1, right? And then all this does, right? It doesn't store anything. It just returns num1 plus num2. Look at the logic of the interior of that. It's not storing number 1 and number 2. All it's doing is it's taking the parameters and it's adding them together and giving that result back. It's like a procedure. And so it has no state. Tool use, yeah, absolutely. So that's one other way of understanding what a static is. The reason I'm banging on about it, I suppose, is it can still get really tricky to use properly. And when we get to week 4 and I introduce objects, the very first question, I'll predict it for you, will be, why do we create objects when we can do it with the static class? And that's a question I'll have to answer when we reach to week 4. I hope, I'm going to sort of draw this to an end and take any more questions and just see if anyone has any other thoughts and questions. So next week, just to summarize, is all about if statements and loops, something you should already have tackled in Python. If you haven't and you need a refresher, each of the videos are demo videos. They'll take you through the concepts, practice the code, and please write the code. Come to your practicals next week. Get your worksheet 1 signed off. Yeah, so Ethan, you've asked the question, or you've made a mention, a non-static, Vilius, I think it's Vilius, isn't it? That's a really good question, but that's one we have to defer for the time being. And there's a good reason I'm deferring it. No, tomorrow is learning catalytics at 3 o'clock. Next week, in the practicals, we're marking your worksheet number 1. But Ethan has said something that's really, really useful. If you get your head around the concepts of what I'm trying to teach you in this object-oriented, over the summer, you could build a complex game. It's staggering the use for objects and how they work. We haven't built our own objects yet, okay? Yeah, absolutely, everything. I mean, you know, it's because of the invention of objects that our computer systems, our software has got so sophisticated. But I'm deferring it for week 4. In the meantime, feel free to create helper functions or utility functions, dump them in a file, reuse them. I think, Jack, I think you might have said it this morning, how, you know, can I get them all together and reuse them because you were copying and pasting them? I think you might have said it, and I thought, actually, this could be useful to you. If this was confusing, I would re-watch this and attempt to get it, because it's a very good strategy in helping you organize your code. Right, completely off topic. When I was doing worksheet 2, I found that if I had a while loop with a Boolean variable as its parameter and change that variable, it doesn't end the program properly. But if I do break, it ends and I don't get the first with it. Tom, it's to do with whether you use a do while or a while. And it's to do with where you change the value within the loop. But you're quite right, they don't behave the same way. I think I might have said that in the video I did attached to how to exit a loop. If you look at it, you're entirely right. Now, Kobe, what a brilliant question to end on. Let me just talk one last concept, and I will be quiet just to answer Kobe's question. So you've seen all this, right? And system.in, very, very quickly. I just want to give you a quick example. You then use your scanner, you do blah, 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 you get your next int, etc. You use it here. Now, Kobe has asked the question, do we need to close our scanner? There's a very interesting thing that happens in object-oriented programming. You see that open bracket and that end bracket? That's called the scope of that object. If I create an object within those brackets, it only exists in that scope. So what happens with Java is it has a mechanism that as soon as you hit the very last one and you leave that method, it clears up your objects. It does it in a queued way, it uses something called garbage collection and so on, but it manages it. And the reason I think Kobe's question is really good is when you think about web interfaces to backend server code, if this was a method, for a web server, and I created an object inside it to do a particular task, it is based on the concept that the moment it's finished, it clears up the object. That means that it deletes the object and it doesn't leak. It leaks, as Brendan has said, leaks come about because you have all these objects you create like this, and you never delete them. You don't have to explicitly do it, okay? Yeah, use flex tape. You don't have to explicitly do it, because if it's in this scope of this function, the way the object-oriented work is that when it falls out of scope, the system will delete it. And Java's quite good with that. Wilhelms, that's a very good question. Okay, tomorrow we have a 4 o'clock optional session. If you've got questions about worksheet 1, save them for that, and we will, and I can chat to you about those questions. I have practical. Hang on a sec, but I'm signed in group 16 Thursday. Later one's not my time. Should I skip Tuesday's practical? Yeah, okay. At the moment, just to round off this session, folks, it's almost there with pre-allocation. Okay, I've tried to make all the adjustments. There might be a few gaps, so feel free to note there is going to be a very short test. I'll tell you what, George, what the test will be, but let me just answer Azamat's point. I will try to tidy up your timetable in a few weeks. Once we settle down, I'll contact Central Timetable and get that stuff sorted. In the meantime, stick to the groups that you've agreed with me that you're going to. I've said to the other staff that I've done this with you, and they will have a problem with it as long as your name and sign off happens in that particular session that you've agreed. So George's question was, is there an exam? I spoke to Matthew about it, and Matthew wants the Java to parallel and mirror the Python. So there will be a short computer test. But here's the thing. The learning catalytics questions will be the basis I will use for the test I give you. Okay, so as I write the learner catalytic questions, I will either reuse them or vary them in order to give you a test at the end. So if you do come and you get your learner catalytic stuff done, you might want a way of kind of, keeping track of that. That will give you some guidance for it. Yeah, Ethan, you can come to drop in and you can ask anything. Well, okay, not quite anything. What we want to try to do is, for those of you, and actually a couple of you are racing ahead, but in the week, the only help we're going to offer is by week. It's going to be a little bit frustrating for you, but I have to do it like that. So those who need help in that week get the time that they need from me and from the other teaching team. If you're patient, you do the work early, and I can sneak in a quick answer to you, I will try, but I will always default to helping you for that week's worth of material, okay? Yes, but Robert, you don't need to use arrays. It isn't odd. And that's a question you need to ask me, and you can ask me in the option. Actually, you can ask me in the practical. The whole point of the practical is you're going to be doing worksheet 2 next week. So don't jump ahead too much. Next week's all about...
Yo, Nadim!
Who's that? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, folks, and I am going to let you all go. And thank you for your... yeah, it was a bit... It was a bit. Okay, I'm going to let you all go, and thank you for your patience. I hope you found that useful, folks.